Talia.
I sat rigid in my seat as the one and only Luciano Romano sat in front of me. After the announcement of the guarding assignments, the new guards were given a chance to interact with their assignments, so that's how we ended up here. I still can't get over the initial shock of finding out that the Luciano Romano and the annoying guard that I had sex with is just one person. Talk about luck. I could feel his teasing gaze on my face, so I pursed my lips together and focused my eyes on the ground. I just hope that these 30 minutes go by rapidly fast so I don't have to talk to him anymore. "You're not so snarky now, are you, Bambi?" he said in a teasing tone, his lips pulling up into a smirk. I let out a small breath and was about to retort, but when I remembered who this person was, I kept it to myself. My face morphed into a painful grimace as I recalled everything that I had said and done to him in the past. I talked back to him on the very first day that I got here. Then, I blatantly told him that he was annoying and assumed that he was a guard. I mean, could you blame me, though? I didn't know that he was the freaking Mafia boss. "You know," he said, breaking the silence. "I'd be more offended if you suddenly act differently now that you found out who I really am. It makes me think that you're a person who sucks up to other people based on their status." I glared at him, making him smirk. "Besides, we've already had sex, Bambi. So, why are you acting so shy right now? Do you remember the way you commanded me last night? Asking me to take you and to thrust into you without any mercy." I leaned over from my seat and covered his mouth with my hand, looking at him with wide eyes. "Sorry," I retracted my hand and leaned back on my seat when I realized what I had done. He chuckled and shook his head. "Whoa, you apologized." I bit my lip and suppressed my annoyance. I let out a deep breath and calmly looked at him. "Look, Mr. Romano, we're going to be working alongside each other for quite a long time, so I hope that we get along. Let's forget about everything that happened before this day because, frankly, I didn't know about your real identity back then. I also sincerely apologize for the actions I've done to offend you," I said in a serious tone. He raised his eyebrows. "Forget about everything? Oh, you mean about how you shamelessly talked back to me? Or assumed that I was a guard? Or maybe it was the time you called me fucking annoying? Let's even forget about the time we had sex together." I closed my eyes and took in deep breaths to calm myself down. However, those actions were futile. I was at my breaking point. "You know," I said through gritted teeth, "you may be the Mafia boss, but you really are fucking annoying. I should have been assigned to one of your sisters," I couldn't help but say. "They seem to be much less annoying than you." "There she is," he smiled. "There's the Bambi I know." "Trust me, though," he added. "You don't want to get assigned to my sisters. They'll be all up in your business like nobody else, especially Renee." I shrugged my shoulders. "Still sounds better than you, to be honest." He crossed his arms in front of his chest. "Well, there's really nothing you can do, Bambi. You've been assigned to me. There's no changing that anymore." I frowned. "Let me just ask this question, why me?" I asked out of curiosity. He could have picked anyone. Heck, he could have picked a man. All the other women that graduated from the system have been assigned to mafiosis or women. But why was I assigned to him? To the very dawn of the Cosa Nostra? "Isn't it obvious, princess?" he chuckled. "I chose you." "Why?" I suspiciously asked. "Well, the people that have been guarding me are always the high-ranking ones. Your brother used to be my guard, but I had to assign him as a trainer for the system since I feel like he'd be more useful in producing high-quality guards. You graduated as the highest ranking in your batch," he continued. "It's only natural that you'd be guarding the highest-ranking official in the clan." "Even if I'm a woman?" He frowned. "What does being a woman have anything to do with this? If you're capable, then you're capable. Gender doesn't have anything to do with that." I was a bit surprised at his words. I didn't expect him to have such a radical view on gender issues. I grew up in a household where women were deemed far less superior than men, so hearing this from him just sounds so heartwarming. Because of that, I couldn't help but smile, my teeth showing for a second. I looked up at Luciano only to see him looking at me with a startled expression. I quickly dropped my smile and looked at him with concern. "What happened?" I asked. He shook his head and let out an awkward cough. "Nothing, nothing," he repeated. "You just smiled." I scoffed. I thought he was in turmoil, but it turns out it was just because of my smile? What a weird guy. "Of course, I smile," I deadpanned. "I'm not a robot. Even robots smile nowadays, you know?" I joked. He chuckled. "I know you're not a robot. But I've never seen you smile before. It's just a shocking sight." "Shocking sight?" I whispered under my breath. Does that mean that I looked monstrous? Fuck, I shouldn't have smiled at all. He must have seen my expression since he straightened his back and clicked his tongue. "It's not what you're thinking. It's just that I've never really seen you smile before." I frowned. I smiled plenty of times before. Sure, I don't smile as much as the average person, especially compared to Daisy. But there were times that I smiled. I'm not as numb as people make me out to be. "Yeah," he nodded his head. "But that was the first time that you smiled because of me." I froze in my seat, and I looked at him dumbfounded. "Well, you've never given me a good reason to smile." He merely chuckled. "You should do it more often. You have a pretty smile."
Talia.
Time flew by fast, and it was already my first day on the job. We were given a week to go back home to our families and spend time with them before we dedicated our lives to protecting the Romano clan. I didn't go home, though. I know that no one would be waiting for me at home, so it'll be futile for me to go back. Instead, I stayed in our designated rooms and trained for the entire week. Daisy proposed for me to come home with her, but I declined. I was uncomfortable with the idea of intruding into another family's home. Now, Luciano and I were on our way to their South Territory. I don't know the full details of the plan, but it seems like he has a meeting with someone around that area. "Are you nervous or something?" Luciano asked as he looked at my shaking hands. I quickly hid them behind my back and shook my head. "No," my voice faltered. "Why would I be nervous?" He chuckled. "You're definitely nervous. Don't worry. Everyone's nervous on their first day on the job." As much as I hated to admit it, I was nervous. Even though I've been thoroughly prepared by the training system, it still feels different being in the actual field. I made sure not to show my nervousness to Luciano, though. I'm sure that he's just going to tease me about it. I cleared my throat and held my head up high. "I told you, I'm not nervous." "Sure, Bambi," he said unbelievingly. "Your shaking hands indicate that you're very confident. In the end, you're still just a little baby," he smirked. I scoffed. "I'm already 18, for your information." "Exactly," he said. "Quite young." "You're just old." I deadpanned. He rolled his eyes. "I'm 22. I don't think I'm that old yet." My eyes widened slightly in surprise. "You're 22? He raised his eyebrows. "What? Were you expecting me to be 40 or something?" I pursed my lips together. Well, he certainly looked young. However, he has this mature vibe to him, must be because he's been the Mafia boss for 4 years already. "I'm just surprised. I don't know much about you, so it's shocking to hear about your real age." He sighed. "Well, my name is Luciano Romano. I'm the youngest out of 3 children, and the only son within our family. I've been doing this job since I was 18, and my favorite color is green." I stared at him, dumbfounded after he said his last statement. "Your favorite color is green, really?" "Why?" he asked. "Green looks nice on the eyes." I scoffed. "I thought it'd be black, like your soul, or maybe even dark red, like the color of blood," I teased. He shook his head. "Not everything that revolves in my life has to do something with my job." Just then, his phone rang, and his face suddenly turned serious. He pressed on the answer button and brought the phone to his ear. "Don Luciano speaking," he greeted. The person on the other phone started ranting endlessly, and although I couldn't hear what they were talking about, I could tell that it was quite important. I stared at Luciano's face for a while, and suddenly felt chills run down my spine. His eyes became much darker and more serious this time around. I've been so used to his annoying personality the last couple of days that I almost forgot that he's such an influential person in the Mafia world. "I'll get to it," he said, raking his hands through his hair. "I know," he nodded his head. The atmosphere in the car had gotten much colder, and I, too, felt quite suffocated by the air. It made me feel like I was definitely in the midst of a mafia boss. After the phone call, he leaned back on his seat and closed his eyes. "Did something happen?" I warily asked. He shook his head. "Nothing," he said in a cold voice, making my body go rigid. I remember when he used that tone on me, when he asked me for my name, and it had the same effect on me back then. "We've arrived, Don." The car came to a halt. Before exiting the car, he held onto my wrist. It was my father who called me. "This negotiation is quite important for the clan. The person that we're meeting today owns some lands in between our territories, and if we want to monopolize the entire area, we have to convince this person to sell to us their lands. So, whatever you do, try not to say anything and let me handle it, all right?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Good. Now, let's go." Asterisk. We entered the Rusty Club, and I couldn't help but grimace. "Control your expression," Luciano said by my side. "This is his territory. We want to please him as much as possible." "This way, sir," a waitress said, leading us over to a VIP room of some sort. We entered the room, and there I saw a sickly-looking old man with a messy beard, sitting in the middle of the room. He was surrounded by burly guards, and he smirked as soon as he saw us enter. "Don Luciano, such a pleasure to see you." "Likewise, Sir Charles." "And this is?" He looked at me with conspicuous eyes, gazing at me like a piece of meat. "This is my guard," Luciano said. "Don't mind her. She's only here to keep me safe." "Such a lucky man you are." Charles licked his lips. "All of my guards aren't as graceful as she is." Luciano cleared his throat and settled on one of the seats. "If you don't mind, let's get straight to business." A disappointed look flashed by Charles' eyes, but he quickly masked it with a pursed lip smile. "Straightforward, are we?" Luciano merely smiled and gestured for him to sit down. I, on the other hand, stood behind Luciano and watched as the transaction went down. I still felt Charles' gaze on me from time to time, but I decided to ignore him. "We're here for one thing and one thing only." "So, you're planning on buying my lands, huh? Why? Is the Romano territory not enough yet?" Charles joked. Luciano shook his head. "The transactions between our factions would be much easier if we could get your land. As you already know, your land is situated between our South and West territory. This will also avoid misunderstandings on both our parts." "How much?" Charles asked. Luciano brought out a blank check and placed it on top of the table. "As much as you'd like." Charles placed his pen in between his lips. "Well, that is a tempting offer, but this land generates one of the highest incomes I have. Perhaps, if you give me something more, then I'd be more tempted to take the offer." Luciano's eyebrows slightly furrowed. "What do you want?" he asked. "Do you want us to relocate you to another land? Or are there any other incentives that you'd like?" Charles laughed out loud, snorting in between each chuckle. "Oh, no, he shook his head. "You and I both know that I'm not lacking in the financial aspect. I, however, had always had this deep longing inside my heart. Despite my charming good looks and immeasurable wealth, I can't seem to find someone to accompany me for the rest of my life." I held in the urge to scoff in disbelief. "Charming good looks? Where? Then, what is it that you'd like?" Luciano frowned. I felt my back stiffening when Charles suddenly gave me a longing look. Afterward, he licked his lips as his eyes strayed down my body. I already had a bad feeling about what was going to happen. Aside from this blank check, he said, looking back at Luciano. Give me your guard as another reward, then I'll hand you the land titles immediately.
Yeah.
No. I tried to keep my face as neutral as possible after hearing those words. Charles wanted me in exchange for his land and Luciano just disagreed. I thought he was going to agree in a heartbeat since this negotiation is very important to the clan. However, he outright refused his proposition. No? Charles raised one eyebrow. I'm giving you a good deal, Luciano. I won't even ask for much money. Just give me your pretty little guard over there. He glanced at me, giving me a sultry look. I'm giving you one last chance, Luciano. Take the deal, and you'll have my lands without any problem. Luciano uncrossed his legs and leaned closer to Charles. My answer is still no, Mr. Charles. You can ask for additional money, but you can't take my guard as compensation. A small smile appeared on my lips. As much as I wanted to help the Romano clan with this negotiation, I honestly don't think that I'll be able to do it. So, I'm quite thankful to Luciano for not giving me away to him. Mr. Charles chuckled, then his bony face turned to an ugly grimace. Unluckily for you, I don't take no for an answer, Luciano. Guards! He gestured his guards to come closer. And before we even knew it, they already started trudging our ways. My eyes momentarily widened in surprise. Shit. Things are starting to get serious. I didn't think that we'd engage in a rumble on the first day of my job. But, look at what we have here. It doesn't make it better that we're severely outnumbered by Charles's crew. It's true that we have some backup guards outside of the club, but it's not nearly enough to counter the guards that Charles has. It is his territory, anyway. So, it's expected that he'd be able to dispatch more people at a quicker pace. Get behind me, Luciano uttered, but I shook my head. I was his guard, for fuck's sake. I should be the one protecting him, not the other way around. With that, I confidently went beside him and got ready for the brawl. Charles was still in his seat, looking at the scene in front of him with a smirk. We made eye contact with each other, and he licked his lips, gesturing for me to come join him. I, however, flicked my middle finger up and threw him a smirk. He was startled for a second, then he commanded his guards to attack us faster. Shit. Wrong move. Luciano and I were surrounded by Charles's guards, but luckily, they don't seem to be trained well enough. We were able to evade all of their attacks without any problem. Charles saw this and called for a few more, making me curse under my breath. There's too many, I quietly said. I think it's best if we run. Good call, Luciano agreed. The two of us continued fighting Charles's guards while trying to get to the exit. Get them! Charles screamed, but we were already able to get to the door, quickly opening it and running for our lives. I saw one of them bringing out a gun from their pockets, and I acted quickly by pulling Luciano to the side. The bullet missed him by a couple of inches, and the two of us started running toward the car. Drive, Luciano said to the driver as soon as we got in. The driver didn't ask any questions and sped through the rough roads. I turned around and sighed in relief when I saw that there weren't any guards trailing us from behind. The two of us were still catching our breaths, the car enveloped in comfortable silence. Why did you do it? I asked, breaking the silence. He glanced at me before leaning his head against the headrest and closing his eyes. What do you mean? Why did you call off the deal? You told me that this negotiation was very important. He was asking for a very unreasonable compensation. He was asking for me, I said, looking at his side profile. He opened his eyes and tilted his head to the side. Now, our eyes were looking straight at each other. There was a playful smile on his lips, like he didn't just bomb an important negotiation a few moments ago. Exactly. That's why I didn't agree. I frowned in confusion. Because it was you. Asterisk. I flinched as another vase was flung over the wall. Luciano, on the other hand, remained unfazed and just stood in front of his father with a dignified stance. We were currently in Don Emiliano Romano's office, Luciano's father. As soon as we got home, his father called him straight to the office. Right off the bat, I could tell that he wasn't happy about the situation. He must have heard how the negotiation fell through. "You ruined the negotiation, Luciano," he calmly said, his eyes looking as deadly as ever. I thought my father was the scariest person in the entire planet. It turns out, Luciano's father actually takes the cake. He didn't even raise his voice, and yet it already sent shivers down my spine. Maybe that's what makes it easier. His actions appear very enraged, yet his voice is as calm as ever. He was being unreasonable, father, Luciano defended. I couldn't give him what he was asking me to. Don Emiliano chuckled. "And what is it that you couldn't give? We have enough money, Luciano. Or maybe you didn't want to give away this precious guard of yours," he said, looking me straight in the eyes. I couldn't handle the intensity of his gaze, so I looked at the wooden floor. "Since when have you cared so much for other people?" he asked. Luciano sighed. "You know how I am, father. I'm not one to involve innocent people in our ordeals. My guard didn't do anything wrong for her to be the compensation for the negotiation." Don Emiliano shook his head. "I thought that I taught you well enough when you became the new Don. It turns out, you're still lacking in plenty of things. You aren't as heartless as I would like you to be." I pursed my lips together, still with my gaze on the ground. At that second, I suddenly felt bad for Luciano. I know that he's a successful Mafia boss and all, but to get to where he is right now must have been quite difficult. "I'm very disappointed, Luciano," he said, finally sitting down on his seat. I held my breath and glanced at Luciano. His expression has stayed the same this entire ordeal. I couldn't help but admire his strength even amidst his father's hurtful words. "I'll fix this, father," he said. "I had a call with Mr. Charles just a while ago. Fortunately, he still wants to push through with the negotiation. You just have to give him what he wants." Luciano sighed. "Give him your guard, Luciano," he commanded. "It would be much easier to get those lands if you just give him what he wants. I'll call Reese and ask him to assign you another guard if that's what you're worried about." "No," Luciano cut his father off, making my eyes widen in surprise. Don Emiliano, too, seems to be surprised. Actually, this was probably the very first time that Luciano had defied his father's orders. "No?" Don Emiliano asked. "No, father," Luciano repeated. "I'll think about another way to get those lands. I don't care how difficult it is. Talia is going to stay as my guard." Don Emiliano let out a chuckle, then he started laughing hysterically. He looked utterly scary from my view. "You've got guts, my son. I'll give you that. But, you're just giving yourself and the people around you a harder time if you continue this on." "I don't care," he said. "I'm going to take those lands through my methods." Don Emiliano sighed before leaning back on his seat. "All right," he finally agreed. "I'll leave it to you. But," he added, "as soon as I find out that the negotiation fell through, I'm going to take matter into my own hands." Luciano merely nodded his head. "You may go," he said. Luciano left the room without any farewell. I quietly followed behind him. However, I made the mistake of looking back before closing the door. And there I saw Don Emiliano looking at me with a cold smirk on his face.